ma'am, I understand. I need to know your address.
He shot. I heard the shots, and they were like poppers, and I wasn't sure what it was, so everyone started panicking and running, so we all dove under the dining room. Some of us dove, some of us left. I don't know. My daughter has been shot. She was shot in the face on the side, and she's bleeding.
I know. I let the officers know. The officers are making sure it's safe for the paramedics to
I
come
need a
in.
bandage, please. Please come immediately.
Who's in your house?
Immediately. Don't know who else is alive.
I know, ma'am. Just stay on the phone with me, okay?
My whole family. There's 30 people, 25 people.
I know.
The scent of pine needles filled the warm California air as Christmas Eve settled over the quiet suburban streets of Covina. Inside the modest two-story home on Knollcrest Drive, the Ortega family had gathered for what should have been their most joyous celebration of the year. The house buzzed with the familiar sounds of a large Mexican-American family coming together, children's laughter echoing from the backyard, the gentle clinking of dishes being cleared from dinner, and the soft shuffle of cards being dealt around the dining room table where 3 generations had just shared a feast that took hours to prepare. Joseph Ortega, known to everyone as Papa Joe, sat at the head of the table with his beloved wife Alicia by his side. At 80 years old, Joseph's weather hands moved the poker chips with the same gentle precision he had used throughout his long life as a hard-working man who had built something beautiful from nothing. Alicia, 70, watched her husband with eyes that still sparkled with the same love she had felt when they first married 53 years ago in a small church ceremony that neither of their families could afford but somehow made magical anyway. They had created a legacy together. Children who grew up to be good people, grandchildren who respected their elders, and a tradition of gathering that made their modest home feel like the center of the universe every Christmas Eve. The dining room table, covered with a red tablecloth that Alicia had sewn herself decades earlier, was now the center of their late-night Texas Hold'em game. Their 4 children, James, Charles, Sylvia, and Alicia, sat around the table with their spouses. Everyone relaxed and happy after the big dinner. The adults had that comfortable, sleepy satisfaction that comes after a perfect meal shared with people you love. They joked quietly, not wanting to wake the younger children, as they played their familiar game that had become as much a part of their Christmas tradition as the tamales and the midnight mass they would attend in just a few hours. In the backyard, near the small swimming pool that Joseph had installed with his own hands years ago, the grandchildren were living their best lives. The older kids had set up video games on the outdoor television, while the younger ones ran around the pool area, their excitement about Santa's upcoming visit making it impossible for them to settle down. 8-year-old Katrina, with her bright eyes and missing front tooth, kept running to the sliding glass door to peer inside and see if it was time for presents yet. Her infectious giggle made everyone smile, and she had spent the entire evening asking every adult when Santa might arrive. Upstairs, 17-year-old Michael Ortiz sat hunched over his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he chatted with friends online. Like most teenagers, he was caught between childhood and adulthood, still excited about Christmas morning but trying to act too cool to show it. His room was his sanctuary, filled with posters of his favorite bands and the organized chaos that only teenage boys can create. He could hear his family's voices drifting up from downstairs, a comforting soundtrack that made him feel safe and loved even as he lost himself in the digital world that felt so important to 17-year-olds. This was the Ortega family at their most beautiful. 3 generations of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, who had maintained their closeness despite the pressures and changes that often tear families apart. They were not wealthy people, but they were rich in the ways that truly mattered. They had built their happiness on small moments like these, on traditions that connected them to their past and to each other, on the simple joy of being together. But outside in the December darkness, evil was approaching their door. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo sat in his rented Dodge Charger just down the street, his hands trembling slightly as he checked his weapons one final time. The red Santa suit felt heavy and uncomfortable, made even more cumbersome by the guns and ammunition he had carefully concealed beneath the jolly costume. The fake white beard scratched against his neck, and a hat kept sliding down over his eyes, but none of that mattered now. He had been planning this moment for months, ever since his divorce from Sylvia had become final just 1 week earlier. At 45 years old, Bruce had reached a point in his life where he felt he had nothing left to lose. The man who once seemed so charming and successful had slowly transformed into something dark and dangerous, consumed by a rage that had been building for over a year. His marriage to Sylvia Ortega Pardo had ended in the most bitter possible way, with lawyers and court orders and monthly payments that reminded him every day of what he considered his humiliation. The financial pressure had been crushing. In June, a court ordered Bruce Pardo to pay $1,785 a month in spousal support and put him on a payment plan of $450 a month for $3,570 that was unpaid. When he lost his job at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in July for fraud, the payments became impossible to make, but the court showed no mercy. Every month brought another reminder of his failure. Another bill he couldn't pay, another humiliation heaped upon what he saw as the unfairness of his situation.
Police and coroners located the last of the bodies this morning. A particularly difficult task after the intense fire that reduced the home to rubble.
Yes, I'm shocked. I would never picture in my right mind he would ever do something to a family. I'm just devastated.
Merry Christmas to me and just kept walking down this way, and that was it.
But this wasn't really about money. This was about control, about power, about a man who could not accept that the woman he had married no longer wanted to be with him. Bruce had fallen in love with Sylvia's warm, welcoming family almost as much as he had fallen in love with her. For a brief, shining moment, he had felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was part of something bigger than himself. When that was taken away, when Sylvia asked for a divorce and moved back in with her parents and siblings, Bruce felt like his entire identity had been stripped away. The FBI psychological profile would later describe Bruce as suffering from extreme narcissism and obsessive-compulsive disorder, conditions that made it impossible for him to process rejection in a healthy way. To Bruce, the end of his marriage wasn't just a personal failure. It was a betrayal that demanded punishment. He couldn't simply move on, couldn't simply start over. Instead, he began to plan his revenge with the methodical precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. The planning had taken months. Starting in June, Bruce began purchasing weapons with cash, visiting Gun World in Burbank multiple times to buy handguns that he carefully concealed from everyone who knew him. He maintained his friendly, charming facade even as he stockpiled ammunition and began constructing the improvised flamethrower device that would turn the Ortega home into an inferno. He even ordered a Santa suit from a costume company, telling the clerk it was for a children's party and paying a deposit with the same casual friendliness that had always been his trademark. To his neighbors and the few friends who still spoke to him, Bruce seemed like a man who was handling his divorce reasonably well. He was polite, even cheerful at times. He helped with small tasks around the neighborhood and continued to act as an usher at the church across the street from his home. Nobody suspected that behind his smile, he was meticulously planning mass murder. Now, sitting in the darkness outside the Ortega home, Bruce could see the warm light spilling from the windows, could hear the faint sounds of laughter and conversation. Inside that house were the people he blamed for his pain, not just Sylvia, but her entire family, the people who had welcomed him and then, in his twisted mind, rejected him. He had driven here with 18 gallons of gasoline, multiple handguns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a homemade flamethrower constructed from racing fuel containers. His plan was simple and horrific. Kill everyone inside, burn the house down, and then escape to Illinois where he had purchased a plane ticket for Christmas morning. At 11:30 p.m., Bruce Pardo stepped out of his rental car and walked toward the front door of the Ortega home. The Santa suit rustled softly in the quiet night air, and the weight of the weapons hidden beneath the red fabric made each step feel heavy and final. This was the moment he had been building toward for months, the culmination of a rage that had consumed every aspect of his life. Inside the house, Little Katrina heard the knock at the door and squealed with delight. "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" she shouted, her 8-year-old voice filled with pure Christmas magic. She had been waiting all evening for this moment, had been good all year just for this, had fallen asleep every night in December dreaming of this exact scenario. When the door opened and she saw the familiar red suit and white beard, Katrina's face lit up with the kind of joy that only children can experience. For one perfect, innocent moment, she believed that Christmas had finally arrived, that all her dreams were about to come true. But instead of gifts and ho-ho-ho, Bruce Pardo pulled out a handgun and shot the little girl directly in the face. The explosion of violence was so sudden, so completely at odds with the peaceful Christmas Eve scene, that for a moment nobody could process what was happening. Katrina stumbled backward, blood streaming from her jaw where the bullet had struck, her small hands reaching up to her face in confusion and terror. Her uncles James and Charles immediately jumped up from the poker table, their protective instincts kicking in as they rushed toward the man in the Santa suit. "It's Bruce!" someone screamed, and suddenly the nightmare had a name. James Ortega, one of Joseph and Alicia's sons, was the first to reach the gunman. At 45 years old, James was a strong man who had spent his life protecting his family, and even as bullets flew around him, his only thought was stopping the man who had just shot his 8-year-old niece. Bruce turned the gun on James and fired, the bullet striking him in the chest and sending him crashing to the floor. Charles, James's brother, was right behind him, and he too was shot down as he tried to wrestle the weapon away from his former brother-in-law. The poker table erupted in chaos as the remaining family members realized they were trapped in their own home with a man who had come to kill them all. Joseph and Alicia, the elderly parents who had spent their entire lives building something beautiful, dove under the dining room table along with their daughters Sylvia and Alicia and daughter-in-law Teresa. The red tablecloth that Alicia had sewn with her own hands decades earlier now became their only shield against the bullets that were tearing their family apart. Letitia, Sylvia's sister and Katrina's mother, watched in horror as her daughter stumbled toward her, blood pouring from the wound in her face. Despite the gunfire, despite the screaming, despite the complete chaos around her, Letitia's maternal instincts took over. She grabbed her injured daughter and began to drag her towards safety, calling 911 even as bullets continued to fly around them. I heard the shots and everyone started panicking and running, and we all dove under the dining room table. Letitia sobbed into phone. He's shooting. My daughter has been shot. She was shot in the face on the side, and she's bleeding." Her voice broke with terror and desperation as she begged the dispatcher to send help immediately. The 911 recording captures the sound of pure panic. Screaming, crying, and the terrible noise of family being destroyed in real time. Letitia's voice is barely recognizable as she tries to explain the inexplicable, tries to make sense of a situation that defied all reason. "My whole family, there's people, 15 people," she managed to say, her words fragmented by shock and fear. But Bruce Pardo wasn't finished. He had brought enough ammunition to kill everyone in the house, and he methodically moved from room to room, hunting down the people who had once been his family. When his guns ran out of bullets, he pulled out his homemade flamethrower and began spraying racing fuel throughout the house. The flames caught immediately, turning the warm, comfortable home into a blazing inferno that reached temperatures hot enough to melt steel. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, the gentle couple who had built their family on love and tradition, died together under their dining room table, holding each other as the fire consumed everything they had spent their lives creating. Their daughters Sylvia and Alicia died with them, along with daughter-in-law Teresa. The poker game that had been bringing them such joy just minutes earlier became the scene of their final moments together. Upstairs, 17-year-old Michael Ortiz was trapped in his bedroom as the flames roared up the staircase. Unlike the others, Michael wasn't shot. He died from the fire and smoke, a young man whose life was cut short just as it was beginning. His computer, where he had been chatting with friends just moments before, melted in the intense heat along with everything else that had made his room his sanctuary. The fire that Bruce created was so intense that it reached 40 to 50 feet into the air, visible for miles around Covina. Neighbors called 911 reporting what looked like an explosion, and within minutes the quiet suburban street was filled with fire trucks, police cars, and ambulances. But it was too late. The house became a furnace that consumed not just the building, but the bodies of the 9 people who died inside. It took 80 firefighters over an hour and a half to control the blaze, and even then the structure was so damaged that identifying the victims became a painstaking process involving dental records and medical examinations. The bodies were so badly burned that families had to wait days to learn the fate of their loved ones, adding an extra layer of torment to an already unbearable tragedy. Meanwhile, Bruce Pardo had fled the scene in his rental car, driving through the night toward his brother's house in Sylmar, 40 miles away. But his plan had backfired in the most literal sense. The intense heat from his own flamethrower had caused his Santa suit to melt into his skin, leaving him with severe 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his arms, hands, neck, and legs. Instead of the clean escape he had envisioned, he found himself dying slowly from his own weapon. When Bruce arrived at his brother's house in the early hours of Christmas morning, he was barely alive. The Santa suit had fused with his burned flesh, and he was in excruciating pain from injuries that would have required immediate medical attention to survive. But Bruce had no intention of surviving. He had wrapped $17,000 in cash around his legs with plastic wrap, apparently planning to use it during his escape to Illinois. But now it served only as evidence of the elaborate planning that had gone into his revenge. Bruce Pardo's brother came home at 3:10 a.m. to find his body on the couch, 2 handguns beside him. Bruce had placed one gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, ending his own life in the same house where he had once been welcome for family gatherings. He was still wearing his wedding ring. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Bruce's planning and the depths of his rage. At his brother's house, police found 4 empty handguns and over 200 rounds of ammunition. His rental car was rigged with an explosive device that could have killed anyone who tried to move it. Back at his own home in Montrose, investigators discovered what they described as a virtual bomb factory. Empty boxes that contained semi-automatic weapons, a tactical shotgun, and containers for highly flammable racing fuel. The picture that emerged was a man who had spent months meticulously planning not just mass murder, but his own elaborate escape. Bruce had researched explosives, purchased weapons with cash to avoid detection, and even practiced with his homemade flamethrower. He had intended to kill his ex-wife's entire family, burn down their house, and then disappear to start a new life somewhere else. Only the unexpected severity of his own burns had prevented him from potentially carrying out additional attacks. But why? What could drive a man to such methodical, calculated evil? The answer lies in the toxic combination of financial pressure, wounded pride, and a personality disorder that made it impossible for Bruce to accept responsibility for his own failures. Police speculated that Pardo's divorce, which had been finalized only 1 week before the killings, was a factor in why Pardo had decided to kill his ex-wife's family. Bruce had met Sylvia Ortega in 2004, introduced by her brother-in-law, who worked with Bruce at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Sylvia was 40 years old and had 3 children from previous relationships, and Bruce's friends thought she was perfect for him. A kind, practical woman with a big, warm family who could help him settle down and find happiness. For a while, it seemed like they were right. Bruce was initially drawn to the Ortega family's warmth and closeness. So different from his own more reserved background, he enjoyed the big family gatherings, the traditions, the sense of belonging to something larger than himself. But after the first year of marriage, something changed. Sylvia told friends that Bruce had become cold, distant, and increasingly controlling. They argued constantly about money, about her children, about her family. When Sylvia asked for a separation in March 2008, Bruce's reaction was swift and cruel. While she was out at a family gathering, he packed all of her belongings and left them on the driveway, effectively locking her out of what had been their shared home. Sylvia was devastated and had to move in with her sister, eventually filing for divorce when it became clear that the marriage could not be saved. The divorce proceedings were bitter and expensive, with Bruce ordered to pay substantial spousal support that he could barely afford even when he had his job at JPL. When he was fired in July for fraud, the financial pressure became crushing, but the court orders remained in place. Every month brought another reminder of his failure, another bill he couldn't pay, another humiliation. But the financial pressure alone doesn't explain the depths of Bruce's rage. The FBI psychological profile revealed a man with severe narcissistic tendencies and obsessive-compulsive disorder, conditions that made it impossible for him to process rejection in a healthy way. To Bruce, the end of his marriage represented not just a personal failure, but a fundamental injustice that demanded retribution. In his twisted mind, Sylvia and her family had betrayed him. They had welcomed him, made him feel like he belonged, and then rejected him when he needed them most. The fact that his own behavior had driven Sylvia away was something he could never accept or understand. Instead, he focused his rage on the people he saw as responsible for his pain. The months of planning that went into the attack revealed the depths of Bruce's obsession. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity. It was a methodically planned act of revenge that took months to organize and execute. Bruce researched weapons, practiced with explosives, and even rehearsed his escape route. He maintained his friendly facade right up until the moment he put on the Santa suit and walked up to the Ortega family's front door. The choice to dress as Santa Claus was particularly cruel, turning the ultimate symbol of childhood joy and Christmas magic into an instrument of terror. Little Katrina's excitement when she saw Santa at the door makes the attack even more heartbreaking. Her last moment of pure, innocent happiness before her world was destroyed forever. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the entire story is how preventable it might have been. Bruce's mental health issues were not unknown to those around him, and his behavior during the divorce proceedings had shown clear signs of escalating rage and instability. Yet he was able to purchase multiple weapons, construct explosive devices, and plan mass murder without anyone recognizing the warning signs or taking action to stop him. The aftermath of the Covina massacre left the community in shock and families destroyed by grief. The survivors faced not just the trauma of losing their loved ones, but the additional burden of survivors' guilt and the knowledge that they had witnessed something so evil it defied comprehension. Letitia, Katrina's mother, emerged as a remarkable example of resilience and grace in the face of unimaginable loss. Despite losing multiple family members and watching her 8-year-old daughter get shot in the face, she chose to focus on healing rather than hatred. "I can't do anything to change what happened," she said in later interviews. "I can only focus on what's brought to me and the good things that are brought to me." Katrina underwent surgery to remove bullet fragments and close a wound in her cheek, and both she and the other young survivor, a 16-year-old who was shot in the back, made remarkable physical recoveries. But the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Letitia worked hard to help the surviving children process their trauma while maintaining some sense of Christmas tradition. She told them that the Santa who came that night wasn't the real one, helping them separate the horror they had experienced from the joy that Christmas should represent. The children attended special camps designed to help them deal with grief and trauma, and slowly began the long process of rebuilding their lives. The extended family also had to find ways to continue their traditions while honoring the memory of those they had lost. They still gather for Christmas dinner, still exchange gifts, and still share stories about their loved ones. On Christmas Eve, instead of going to midnight mass, they visit the cemetery where Joseph, Alicia, and the others are buried, maintaining their connection to family members who can no longer join them around the dinner table. One of the nephews who lost both parents in the massacre became the guardian of his 3 younger siblings, stepping up to provide stability and love when their world had been turned upside down. Letitia and her husband took in her sister's youngest daughter, expanding their own family to help fill the void left by so much loss. The detectives who worked the case formed lasting bonds with the surviving family members, checking in on them regularly, especially around Christmas. The investigation officially ended nearly 10 years ago, but the human connections forged in the aftermath of such tragedy have endured. Perhaps most remarkably, some of the survivors have found ways to turn their experience into something positive. Katrina underwent surgery to remove bullet fragments and closed the wound in her cheek, and grew up to become an advocate for gun violence prevention. As a high school student, she participated in walkouts and protests, using her personal experience to speak out against the kind of violence that destroyed her family. During one school walkout, Katrina read the names of the victims of the Parkland shooting, her voice steady and strong as she honored other families who had experienced similar losses. "Being able to really fight for something that is truly close to my heart is very different," she said, explaining how her childhood trauma had given her a unique perspective on gun violence and its impact on families. The Covina massacre remains one of the most shocking crimes in California history, a reminder that evil can strike anywhere, anytime, even in the most sacred spaces of family and home. The image of a man in a Santa suit shooting children and grandparents at a Christmas Eve celebration is almost too horrible to comprehend. Yet happened in a quiet suburban neighborhood where people thought they were safe. But the story of the Ortega family is also one of resilience, love, and the power of human connections to survive even the worst imaginable circumstances. The survivors chose love over hatred, healing over vengeance, and hope over despair. They rebuilt their traditions, maintained their closeness, and found ways to honor their lost family members while creating new memories with those who remained. The 9 people who died that night, Joseph and Alicia Ortega, their children James, Charles, Sylvia, and Alicia, daughter-in-law Teresa, 17-year-old Michael, and the others, are remembered not as victims but as beloved family members whose lives had meaning and value beyond the circumstances of their deaths. Their memory lives on the children they raised, the traditions they created, and the love they shared that proved stronger than the hatred that tried to destroy it. Today, more than 15 years later, the Ortega family continues to gather for Christmas. The house on Nolecrest Drive is gone, replaced by new construction, but the bonds that Bruce Pardo tried to destroy have endured. The poker games continue. The children still play in backyards, and Christmas Eve still brings families together around dinner tables laden with love and tradition. The Santa suit that Bruce Pardo wore that night was intended to be a disguise, a way to get close to his victims, while hiding his true intentions. But in the end, it became a symbol of how evil can masquerade as good, how hatred can hide behind familiar faces, and how important it is to recognize the warning signs before tragedy strikes. The Covina Christmas Eve massacre stands as one of the darkest chapters in American crime history, a reminder that domestic violence can escalate to unimaginable levels when mental illness, access to weapons, and unchecked rage combine in the worst possible way. But it also stands as a testament to the power of human resilience, the strength of family bonds, and the ability of love to survive even in the face of the most senseless evil. The children who survived that night have grown up to be thoughtful, compassionate adults who understand both the fragility and the preciousness of life. They carry within them the memory of their lost family members, but also the knowledge that love is stronger than hate, that families can heal from even the deepest wounds, and that Christmas, despite everything, can still be a time of joy and togetherness. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of all, that even after experiencing the worst that humanity has to offer, it is still possible to choose hope, to choose love, and to choose to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. The Ortega family story is ultimately not about the evil that tried to destroy them, but about the love that proved indestructible, the traditions that endured, and the future they built from the ashes of their darkest night.